Welcome to Global Nexus. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In October 2010, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Liu Xiaobo, a jailed Chinese human rights activist. The announcement sent shockwaves around the globe, as Liu was not only a symbol of peaceful resistance, but also a vocal critic of the Chinese government's human rights record. His absence at the ceremony, marked by an empty chair, became a powerful image of both hope and defiance. The world applauded, celebrating the courage of a man who dared to speak out. But in Beijing, the mood was anything but celebratory. Chinese officials saw the award as a direct insult, a challenge to their authority, and a blatant act of political interference by the West. China's response was immediate and harsh, summoning Norway's ambassador and condemning the award as an attack on its sovereignty. The Chinese government issued stern warnings, making it clear that there would be consequences for what they saw as a grave affront. Despite Norway's insistence that the Nobel Committee was independent and acted without government influence, China refused to accept this explanation. In their eyes, the entire nation of Norway was responsible for the perceived slight. Diplomatic ties soured overnight. China began isolating Norway both politically and economically, canceling meetings, freezing negotiations, and halting high-level visits. The once friendly relationship quickly turned cold. The message was clear: crossing Beijing would come at a steep price. China's actions sent a warning not just to Norway, but to the entire international community about the risks of challenging its authority. Years of growing trade and goodwill between the two countries froze instantly. Norwegian exports, once welcomed in China, now faced endless delays and obstacles at Chinese ports. Norwegian industries, especially salmon exporters, braced for impact as China flexed its economic muscle. Shipments of Norwegian salmon were suddenly blocked or subjected to strict inspections, devastating a key sector of Norway's economy. The Nobel decision became a turning point, showing how a single event could unravel years of progress. Trade talks stalled, and hopes for a free trade agreement faded into the background. What followed was a chilling lesson in the power of geopolitics over global trade. The world watched as Norway paid the price for a decision it technically didn't make, and as China demonstrated its willingness to use economic leverage as a diplomatic weapon. The fallout would last for more than half a decade, reshaping the relationship between Norway and China. It would take years of quiet diplomacy and patient negotiation before the ice would finally begin to thaw. This is the story of how one prize triggered a diplomatic and economic deep freeze, reminding the world that sometimes the cost of standing up for human rights can be measured in more than just words. Before the crisis, Norway dominated China's salmon market, supplying over 90% of all fresh imports. Norwegian salmon was a luxury brand, trusted for its quality and freshness. Years of investment in logistics and marketing had made Norway the undisputed king of Chinese salmon. The market was booming, with annual growth rates up to 40%. Norwegian exporters were confident, planning for a future of endless opportunity. But this dominance hid a vulnerability: total reliance on China. When the diplomatic freeze hit, Norwegian salmon became the first casualty. Suddenly, the product that symbolized strong trade ties was now a target. The industry's optimism vanished, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Norway's salmon empire was about to crumble, and the fall would be swift. The king's crown was slipping and the world was watching. China didn't announce sanctions. There were no official statements, no dramatic headlines, and no formal bans. Instead, the response was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. It used bureaucracy as a weapon, wielding red tape and regulations with surgical precision. Norwegian salmon shipments, once welcomed, suddenly faced endless customs delays and a barrage of new health inspections. Each box was scrutinized, paperwork was questioned, and shipments were held for days or even weeks. Fresh fish, meant to be delivered quickly, rotted in warehouses. Importers, frustrated by the uncertainty, canceled orders, and the entire supply chain began to unravel. Chinese officials insisted it was all about food safety, pointing to regulations and standards. But for those involved, the real message was unmistakable: Norway was being punished. Norway's market share in China plummeted from a dominant 92% to just 29% in only 3 years. A staggering collapse for an industry built on trust and reliability. The unofficial blockade, enforced by paperwork and inspections, proved just as effective as any formal ban could have been. Norwegian exporters were left in limbo, unable to predict if their fish would ever reach Chinese consumers or if their investments would simply rot away. Chinese buyers, wary of delays and losses, turned to safer, more reliable sources from other countries, shifting their business elsewhere almost overnight. The once thriving trade between Norway and China ground to a halt, leaving factories idle and docks deserted. China had closed its doors without ever needing to say so out loud, and without a single official decree. The lesson was clear. In global trade, paperwork and process can be just as powerful as politics or tariffs, shaping markets and livelihoods with the stroke of a pen. Norway's salmon industry was left reeling, facing an uncertain future, with no end to the blockade in sight. The cost of crossing China was now painfully clear, not just in lost profits, but in livelihoods disrupted and trust broken across continents. As Norway stumbled, competitors rushed in. The Faroe Islands and the UK, especially Scotland, seized the opportunity. The Faroe Islands, once absent from the Chinese market, became a major supplier almost overnight. Their political neutrality made them an ideal partner for China. Scottish salmon also gained ground, filling supermarket shelves once reserved for Norwegian fish. These new players built strong relationships and brand loyalty with Chinese consumers. By the time Norway returned, the market had changed. The days of Norwegian dominance were over. Now, Norway was just one of many vying for a share. The vacuum left by Norway's exit was filled, and the new order was here to stay. The salmon throne had new contenders. The economic fallout was staggering. Norwegian salmon exports to China collapsed by 92%, costing the industry hundreds of millions. Total export losses to China reached into the billions as growth vanished across multiple sectors. Rising global salmon prices softened the blow, but couldn't replace lost opportunities. Norway's absence allowed rivals to cement their positions in the world's fastest-growing market. The price of the Nobel Prize was measured in billions lost and a diminished global standing. The saga exposed the risks of relying on a single powerful trading partner. For Norway, it was a costly lesson in the dangers of economic interdependence. The Nobel fallout froze all high-level contact between Norway and China. Norwegian officials were shunned in Beijing, meetings and negotiations stalled, a promising free trade agreement was abandoned, and cultural exchanges dwindled. China even singled out Norway for visa restrictions, making its isolation clear. The Norwegian government was caught between defending its values and repairing relations. Domestic support for the Nobel decision complicated any apology. For 6 years, the freeze persisted, hurting trade and cooperation on global issues. Norway learned the limits of its influence against a superpower. The diplomatic winter was long, cold, and costly. After 6 long years of diplomatic frost, subtle signs of a thaw finally began to emerge between Norway and China. The icy silence that had defined their relationship was slowly melting, hinting at the possibility of reconciliation. Norway, eager to restore ties, made a series of quiet but significant concessions. Among the most notable was its decision to distance itself from the Dalai Lama, a move that signaled to Beijing a willingness to respect China's sensitivities. Behind closed doors, Norwegian officials carefully navigated the diplomatic minefield, hoping to avoid further offense. In December 2016, the two countries issued a joint statement that officially restored diplomatic relations. Norway pledged to respect China's core interests and sovereignty, marking a turning point after years of tension and uncertainty. With the agreement in place, trade resumed almost immediately. Norwegian salmon once again was cleared for export to China. A new seafood agreement set ambitious targets, aiming to reclaim lost ground and boost Norway's presence in the lucrative Chinese market. But the landscape had shifted. During Norway's absence, competitors had filled the gap. The Chinese market, once dominated by Norwegian salmon, now featured a variety of international brands vying for attention. The saga revealed just how quickly fortunes can change when politics and trade collide. Norwegian exporters faced new challenges, and politicians debated how to prevent such vulnerabilities in the future. The years of lost opportunity became a cautionary tale for any nation heavily dependent on a single market. Factories sat idle, and workers felt the sting of uncertainty. In the aftermath, Norway realized that diversification and proactive diplomacy were not just strategies, but necessities for survival in a volatile global economy. The story underscores the delicate balance every nation must strike between upholding its values and protecting its economic interests. For Norway, the lesson was hard-earned. Norway's experience stands as a warning. In a world dominated by giants, small nations must tread carefully, weighing every diplomatic move with caution and foresight. Today, the salmon are flowing again, and Norwegian exporters are rebuilding their presence in China. Yet, the scars of the freeze remain, a reminder of how fragile international relationships can be. The lesson is clear. In global trade, politics is never far from the surface, and the path to recovery is often as complex as the crisis itself.